The cold was a constant. It lived in the floorboards of her tiny cabin, a deep, gnawing cold that crept up through the soles of her worn boots and settled in her bones. Lyra had learned to live with it, just as she had learned to live with the gnawing in her belly and the ache in her heart. They were simply parts of her now, familiar companions in the long, silent winters. Her pack had cast her out. The words still echoed in her memory, sharp and cruel as shards of ice. Barren. Defective. A mouth to feed with no purpose. Runt, the alpha's son who had once courted her with clumsy smiles, had been the one to say it loudest, his voice full of a new, hard-edged authority. He had stood before the pack, puffed up with his own importance, and pointed a condemning finger. She was useless, an empty vessel, and so she was sent away, to the edge of the territories, to a crumbling hunter's cabin that no one else wanted, to be forgotten. And she had been forgotten. Most days the silence was the loudest thing she knew. It was broken only by the whip of the wind through the skeletal pines and the frantic drumming of her own heart when a shadow passed overhead. Loneliness was a physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders until her spine bowed. She was 22, and her life was already over. She would simply exist here until the cold or the hunger finally won. It was on a day when the cold was winning that she found him. A patch of gray against the white snow, so still she thought it was a rock. But then a faint puff of steam rose from it, a fragile signal of life in the vast dead landscape. Curiosity, a feeling she had thought long extinguished, stirred within her. She moved closer, her boots crunching a loud protest in the stillness. It was a wolf, a runt by the looks of it. Scrawny and matted, its fur the color of old ash. One of its back legs was twisted at a sickening angle, the bone clearly shattered and healed badly, rendering it useless. It was a three-legged thing, a creature doomed from birth. He was shivering violently, a low, pathetic whimper escaping his throat. Her pack would have killed it on sight. A weakness like that was a contamination, a stain on the strength of the bloodline. Kick it, break its neck, leave it for the crows. Don't waste a single shred of pity on what was already dead. Lyra looked at the shivering, broken creature and saw herself. Useless, defective, cast out to die alone. A surge of something hot and fierce, something that felt dangerously like rage, burned through her. No, not this one. Not today. She knelt, her knees sinking into the biting snow. The wolf tried to lift its head to show its teeth in a snarl, but the effort was too much. Its head fell back with a soft thud. Its eyes, a pale, luminous amber, met hers. They held no fight, only a deep, ancient exhaustion. "It's all right," she whispered, her voice rough from disuse. The words were a puff of white in the frozen air. "I'm not going to hurt you." He was heavier than he looked, a dead weight of bone and matted fur. She gritted her teeth, wrapping her thin arms around his torso and heaving. The effort sent fire through her own underfed muscles. She stumbled, half dragging, half carrying the limp animal back toward the thin curl of smoke that marked her cabin. Every instinct screamed at her. This was madness. She barely had enough food for herself. A wolf, even a crippled one, was a predator. It was a mouth she could not afford to feed. But as she laid him gently on the worn rug before her meager fire, his amber eyes fluttered open again and looked at her. And in their depths, she saw not a beast, but a soul. A soul as lost and lonely as her own. She named him Ash. The first few days were a battle of wills. He refused the water she offered, turning his head away with a faint growl that was more pathetic than threatening. He wouldn't touch the small piece of salted meat she held out, even as his stomach rumbled. He was trying to die. He had accepted his fate, and her interference was an unwelcome disruption. "You stubborn fool," she murmured, dipping a rag in the precious warm water and gently dabbing his dry, cracked lips. "You will not die in my home. I forbid it." It was a ridiculous thing to say to a wolf, but the sound of her own voice, firm and clear in the small space, surprised her. When had she last forbidden anything? She had only ever accepted her fate, her loneliness, her worthlessness. On the third day, he drank. He lapped weakly at the water in the shallow bowl, his gaze never leaving her face. It was a truce, a surrender. That night, for the first time in a long time, Lyra slept without dreaming of Yorun's condemning eyes. She learned the rhythm of his pain. A low whine meant the mangled leg was cramping. A restless shifting meant the hunger was sharp. A stillness, a retreat deep within himself, meant the despair was close. She tended to him as if he were a child, her movements gentle, her voice a constant low murmur. She cleaned his wounds, the festering scrapes and bites that covered his thin body. She used the last of her healing salves, the ones she'd been hoarding for herself. She splinted his useless leg, not with any hope of it healing, but simply to keep it from dragging and catching on the floorboards. As she worked, her fingers brushing against his coarse fur, strange images would flicker at the edge of her vision. A flash of gold, like a crown catching the light. The scent of pine and old stone, of a great hall warmed by 100 fires, the feeling of immense power, of a gaze that could command armies. She would blink, and it would be gone. It was just her, and a crippled wolf in a tiny, cold cabin. The hunger must be making her see things. Hallucinations born of solitude and starvation. Slowly, Ash began to heal. The wounds closed. A bit of flesh returned to his bones. He could stand now, favoring his 3 good legs, his broken one held awkwardly off the ground. He followed her everywhere, a silent gray shadow at her heels. When she sat by the fire, he would lay his head on her feet. The warmth of him was a comfort she hadn't realized she was starving for. He started to provide. One morning, she opened the door to find a fat rabbit lying on the step, its neck cleanly broken. Another day, 2 squirrels. He would limp out into the snow before dawn and return with something for their larder, laying it at her feet as a solemn offering. He was paying his way. He was earning his place. It was more than anyone had ever done for her. One evening, the wind howled like a hungry ghost, rattling the very bones of the cabin. The fire was low, and the cold was seeping through the walls. Lyra shivered, pulling her thin blanket tighter around her shoulders. She was so tired. Tired of being cold, tired of being hungry, tired of being alone. A tear slipped from her eye, tracing a cold path down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away. Crying was a luxury, a waste of warmth and energy. Ash, who had been sleeping by the hearth, rose. He limped over to her, his amber eyes soft with a strange knowing light. He nudged her hand with his nose, then laid his great gray head in her lap. The weight of it was solid, real, reassuring. She tentatively placed a hand on his head, her fingers sinking into the thick fur of his ruff. He didn't flinch. He leaned into her touch, a deep rumble starting in his chest. It wasn't a growl. It was a purr, a sound of pure contentment. She began to talk. The words poured out of her, a floodgate of loneliness and pain breaking open. She told him about her pack, about her family who had looked away. She told him about Jorund, about the shame of being declared barren, the public humiliation. She told him about the cold and the fear, and the crushing certainty that she would die here, forgotten by the world. The wolf just listened, his head a warm, heavy weight in her lap, his amber eyes fixed on her face. He seemed to understand everything. He absorbed her sorrow, taking it into himself without judgment. When she finally fell silent, her voice hoarse, her cheeks wet, he licked the tears from her hand. It was a gesture of such profound tenderness that it broke her heart all over again. The boundary was eroding. She knew it was madness. He was a wolf, an animal. But he was also the only living soul who had ever looked at her with anything other than pity or scorn. He looked at her like she was precious, like she was his. The visions came more frequently. When he looked at her, she would sometimes see not a wolf, but a man, a king. Tall and broad-shouldered, with hair as black as a raven's wing and the same piercing amber eyes. He wore a crown of silver and sat on a throne of dark wood, and his presence filled her with an awe that was terrifying and exhilarating. She was losing her mind. The loneliness had finally cracked her. One afternoon, Ash returned from a hunt not with a rabbit, but with something held delicately in his jaws. He trotted to her and gently deposited it in her lap. It was a winter rose, a single, perfect bloom of deep crimson, its petals edged with frost. It was an impossible thing, a flower that could not be alive in this frozen wasteland. Yet here it was, vibrant and fragrant, a jewel of life against her worn wool trousers. She stared at it, her fingers trembling as she picked it up. How? Where had he found it? She looked at him, and he met her gaze. He didn't look like a dumb animal that had stumbled upon a pretty trinket. He looked at her with an intensity, a deliberate purpose, that stole her breath. He lowered his head, nudging the flower in her hand, and then laid his head back in her lap, looking up at her with an expression of such raw, heartbreaking devotion that she finally understood. This was a gift, a courtship. This was a confession. Tears streamed down her face, but this time they were not tears of sorrow. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his, closing her eyes. "You foolish, wonderful creature," she whispered. I think I love you too." A jolt went through them both, a spark of warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. For a dizzying second, the image of the amber-eyed king was so clear, so solid, she felt she could reach out and touch him. She felt his shock, his hope, his longing, as if they were her own. Then it was gone, and it was just her and Ash, and a single impossible rose in a cold, lonely cabin. But something had shifted. The world felt different, brighter. The peace was shattered a week later. The scent hit her first. The heavy, musky smell of unfamiliar wolves. Ash was on his feet in an instant, a low, rumbling growl tearing from his chest. He moved to stand in front of her, planting his 3 good legs, a crippled guardian before his charge. The door to the cabin was kicked open with a splintering crash. 3 figures filled the doorway, blocking the light. The one in the middle was huge, his bulk filling the frame. His scent was sickeningly familiar. Jorund. His eyes, small and cruel, scanned the cabin, taking in the meager furnishings, the fire, the rabbit stew bubbling over the hearth. They landed on Lyra, and a slow, ugly smile spread across his face. "Well, well," he sneered. "Look what we have here. The barren bitch, playing house." His 2 companions snickered. They were enforcers from her old pack, brutes who lived for violence. Lyra's blood ran cold. "What do you want, Jorund?" "Heard a rumor," he said, stepping inside. He wrinkled his nose. "A lone female, living on prime hunting ground. Thought I'd come and claim what's rightfully mine." His gaze swept over her, possessive and vile. "You've filled out a bit. Exile suits you, but this hovel, it stinks of mutt." His eyes finally fell on Ash, who stood his ground, growling, the fur on his back raised into a ridge. Jorund laughed, a harsh barking sound. "By the spirits, what is that? You're keeping a 3-legged freak as a pet?" He took another step, and Ash's growl deepened into a snarl, his lips peeling back to reveal yellowed teeth. "Don't," Lyra warned, her voice trembling. Jorund ignored her. He feinted a kick, and Ash lunged, snapping at the air. Jorund was faster. His boot connected with Ash's ribs with a sickening thud. Ash yelped, a high, pained sound, and stumbled, his crippled leg giving way. "Pathetic," Jorund spat. He turned his attention back to Lyra. "Now, we can do this the easy way, or we can do this the fun way. You're my property now. This land, this cabin, You. It all belongs to me. The rage she had felt by the snowbank months ago returned, a white-hot inferno. I belong to no one, she said, her voice low and shaking with fury. Yoren's smile vanished. Wrong answer. He moved toward her, but before he could take 2 steps, a gray blur launched itself at his leg. Ash, ignoring his own pain, had sunk his teeth into Yoren's calf. Jorand roared, shaking his leg violently. He grabbed Ash by the scruff of his neck and threw him against the wall. Ash hit the wood with a heavy crack and slid to the floor, stunned and whimpering. I'm going to enjoy skinning that mutt, Jorand snarled, blood dripping from the wound on his leg. He advanced on Ash, his eyes promising murder. Something inside Lyra broke. No! She screamed, and threw herself in front of Ash's crumpled body. She spread her arms wide, shielding him, facing the monster who had ruined her life. Stop. Leave him alone. Jorand halted, surprised by her defiance. A cruel amusement lit his eyes. You'd protect that thing over yourself? It's just a worthless runt. He's worth more than you will ever be, she spat, the words tasting of blood and truth. Fine, Jorand shrugged. I'll kill him after I'm done with you. He lunged for her. Lyra closed her eyes, a strange calm settling over her. She had lived a small, sad life, but she had known love. She had saved one good thing from this cruel world. If her death could buy Ash a few more moments to escape, it was a price she would willingly pay. She braced for the impact, for the pain. It never came. Instead, a sound filled the cabin, a sound that was not a whimper or a growl, but something deeper, older. It was the sound of bedrock grinding, of mountains shifting. It was the sound of power awakening. Her eyes snapped open. Behind her, Ash was rising. But it wasn't Ash anymore. His body was contorting, twisting. There was a horrific series of cracks and snaps as bones broke and reformed, stretching, growing. His matted gray fur was darkening, shifting to the color of polished jet. The useless, crippled leg straightened, thickened, and planted itself firmly on the floor. He grew and grew. His head touched the low ceiling, then pushed through it with a shower of splintered wood and thatch. He was immense, a creature of shadow and fury, larger than any wolf she had ever seen, larger than any wolf from the oldest legends. His amber eyes were no longer pale and exhausted. They were burning suns, molten gold, fixed on Jorand with an intelligence that was utterly, terrifyingly human. Jorand and his men were frozen, their faces masks of disbelief and primal terror. They were staring at a god, or a demon. The giant wolf took a step forward, the floorboards groaning under his weight. He was no longer a runt. He was a king. Jorand found his voice, a choked, strangled squeak. What? What are you? The wolf opened its massive jaws, but the voice that emerged was not a snarl. It was a voice that echoed with centuries of command, a voice of thunder and crushed velvet. I am your king. And then he struck. It was not a fight. It was an execution, a blur of black fur and righteous fury. Jorand's men were thrown through the walls of the cabin as if they were dolls. Jorand himself tried to shift, to meet the threat in his own wolf form, but the great beast was on him before he could even begin, one massive paw pinning him to the ground, the floor cracking under the force. The giant wolf leaned down, its hot breath washing over Jorand's terrified face. It did not rip out his throat. It simply looked at him, and in that gaze was the weight of all the injustice Jorand had ever committed. It was a judgment, pure and absolute. Jorand screamed, a thin, high sound of a mind shattering. Then, silence. The great wolf stepped back, leaving Jorand a gibbering, broken mess on the floor. The battle was over. The cabin was destroyed, its walls blown out, the cold winter air rushing in. Lyra stood amidst the wreckage, trembling, staring at the impossible creature she had nursed back to health. He turned to face her. His burning golden eyes met hers, and the fury in them softened, replaced by an emotion she knew intimately: devotion, gratitude, love. He took a step toward her, and his form began to shimmer, to dissolve like smoke. The black fur receded, the massive form contracted. Where the giant wolf had stood, a man now stood. He was tall, taller than any man she had ever seen, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the world. His hair was as black as a starless night, and his eyes were the same burning amber she knew so well. He was naked, his body a tapestry of pale scars, both old and new. She recognized a thin white line along his ribs where she had cleaned a deep gash on ash. He was the king from her visions. He was real. He looked at her, his expression raw, vulnerable. He took a hesitant step. "Lyra," he said, and his voice, the same deep, resonant voice that had shattered Yorund, was now soft, uncertain. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. The world tilted on its axis. The wolf she had loved, the man from her dreams, they were one and the same. She stared at him, her mind struggling to connect the broken runt she had found in the snow with the magnificent, powerful being who stood before her. It was impossible. It was everything. He saw the confusion, the fear in her eyes. He took another slow step, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "It's me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It was always me." He gestured to the faint scar on his ribs. "You did this. You healed me." He touched his leg, now strong and whole. "You saved me." Who are you?" she whispered, though she already knew. "My name is Kaelin," he said, "and I am the Alpha King." Lyra's knees felt weak. The Alpha King, the ruler of all packs, a figure of legend, a being so powerful he was more myth than man. He was supposed to be 1,000 miles away in his mountain fortress, not standing in the ruins of her cabin. "But you were," she stammered, gesturing vaguely. "You were small, broken." A shadow of immense pain crossed his face. "I was dying," he said softly. "A curse, placed upon my bloodline generations ago. A wasting sickness that drains my power, my very life force. It had finally brought me to my knees. I was crawling into the forest to die, to spare my kingdom the sight of their king fading into nothing." He looked at her, his amber eyes burning with an intensity that made her heart pound. "The seers spoke of a cure, a chance. They said the curse could only be broken by the hand of a true mate. One who would choose me not for my crown or my power, but in my weakest, most wretched form. One who would love the runt, not the king." He took the final step that separated them, his presence an overwhelming wave of heat and power and pine scent. He gently cupped her face in his large, warm hands. His touch was electric. "I had given up hope," he whispered, his thumbs tracing the line of her cheekbones. "For centuries, none have been found. I thought I would fade into legend as the last of my line, and then I collapsed at the edge of your woods, and you found me." Her mind reeled. The visions, the flashes of gold and power. They weren't hallucinations. They were echoes. Echoes of him, of his true self, bleeding through the curse. Her strange, secret sight had been seeing the truth all along. "Your pack cast you out for being barren," he murmured, his eyes searching hers. "They were fools. Your spirit is more fertile than any land, your heart more life-giving than any spring. They threw away their greatest treasure." "When you stood before Yorund," he continued, his voice dropping to a raw whisper, "when you offered your life for a crippled wolf, you broke it, Lyra. Your love, your sacrifice. It was the key. It shattered the curse." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. She could feel the heat of him, the sheer, vibrant life that now poured from him. It was overwhelming. "I am whole because of you," he breathed, I love you. I have loved you since the moment you looked at a dying thing in the snow and chose kindness over cruelty." Tears were streaming freely down her face now. She wasn't Lyra the Baron, Lyra the useless. She was the woman who had saved a king. She was the woman a king loved. She reached up, her trembling hands touching his face, his jaw rough with stubble. He was real. This was real. Ash, she whispered, the name feeling both foreign and perfectly right on her tongue. A smile, the first she had ever seen on his face, transformed him. It was like the sun breaking through 1,000 years of cloud. "My name is Kaelin," he repeated gently, "but if you wish, you may call me Ash forever. It is the name my heart first answered to." She surged upward, her mouth finding his. The kiss was not gentle. It was a collision of worlds, of a lonely woman and a dying king, of desperation and salvation. It was the taste of winter roses and wood smoke, of ancient power and newfound hope. A jolt went through her, a blinding white light behind her eyes. It was not just a kiss, it was a completion, a bonding. Power, raw and untamed, erupted from her. It wasn't a destructive force like his had been. It was life. A wave of pure golden energy poured from her into him, a river of warmth and vitality. She felt the last vestiges of the curse inside him, the cold, dark tendrils of it, shrivel and burn away in the face of her light. She felt his body mend, the ancient weariness seeping from his bones, replaced by a strength that was staggering. And she felt her own power settle within her. The flickers, the echoes she had seen, now resolved into a clear, steady sense. She could see the past clinging to him like dust, the long, lonely centuries on the throne, the despair as the curse took hold. And she could see the future, a shimmering thread of gold that bound them together, leading them away from this broken cabin and into a new life. When the kiss ended, they were both breathless. He looked at her, his eyes wide with wonder. "Your power," he breathed. "You are a mender, a soul healer, the rarest of gifts." She had a gift. She wasn't empty. She was full. Full of life, full of light, full of a love so powerful it could remake the world. He swept her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. Jorund and his men were beginning to stir, groaning in the snow. Kaelin paid them no mind. They were less than insects to him now. "Come," he said, his voice ringing with a new joyful authority. "Let us go home, my queen." The journey to the Onyx Citadel, the heart of the kingdom, was a blur. Kaelin shifted back into his wolf form, not the giant, terrifying beast of his rage, but a great black wolf still larger than any other, with her perched securely on his back. They ran through the frozen forests, a black streak against the snow, moving with impossible speed. The citadel was a marvel of black stone and silver light, carved into the heart of a mountain. Guards in dark armor fell to their knees as Kaelin entered the gates, their faces a mixture of shock and ecstatic relief. Whispers followed them through the great halls. "The king has returned. He is whole. And who is the woman he carries?" Kaelin did not stop until he reached the throne room. It was just as she had seen it in her visions, a vast hall of dark wood and stone, warmed by a massive hearth. He shifted back into his human form, setting her gently on her feet before the twin thrones. He turned to face the stunned court, the advisors and nobles who had gathered. His arm was a possessive, protective band around her waist. "For 500 years a shadow has been upon my house," Kaelin announced, his voice booming through the hall. "Today, that shadow is gone. The curse is broken." A wave of gasps and joyous murmurs went through the crowd. "It was not broken by strength of arms or by ancient magic," he continued, his voice softening as he looked down at her. "It was broken by courage, by kindness, by love." He turned her to face him, ignoring the hundreds of watching eyes. He went down on one knee before her, the mighty Alpha King kneeling in front of the woman his world had cast away. "Lyra of the Forgotten Cabin," he said, his voice clear and true. "You who healed the beast, you who saved the man. You are my mate, my heart, and the healer of my soul. Will you be my queen?" Tears welled in her eyes. The entire world was watching, but all she could see was him. Her Ash, her Kaelin, her king. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." Months passed, the winter thawed, giving way to a vibrant green spring. Lyra was no longer the shivering, half-starved exile. She was a queen. She walked the halls of the Onyx Citadel not with fear, but with a quiet confidence that drew people to her. They saw the way the king looked at her, as if she were the sun, and they came to love her as he did. Her power grew. She learned to control it, to use her sight to mend hurts both old and new. She could touch a courtier and soothe the ache of a long-held grief. She could walk through the kennels and calm the most agitated wolves with a soft word. She was not a queen of war and politics, but of heart and healing. She was exactly what the kingdom, so long ruled by a king in constant pain, had needed. One morning she stood on the balcony of their chambers, looking out at the sprawling green valley below. Kaelin came to stand behind her, wrapping his strong arms around her. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his warmth a familiar comfort. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured into her hair. "Jorund," she admitted. The name left a sour taste. News had reached them weeks ago. He had been stripped of his rank, his mind broken by the terror of Kaelin's transformation. He was now the lowest Omega, shunned by the very pack he had once sought to lead. It was a fitting end. "Do not waste a single thought on him," Kaelin said, his voice a low growl. "He is yesterday's dust." "It's not him," she clarified. "It's what he said. What they all said." She placed a hand over her own belly. It was still flat, but she knew. She had felt the flicker of a new life inside her, a tiny, precious spark. "They called me barren." Kaelin turned her in his arms, his hands framing her face. "It was a lie," he said fiercely. "A suppression. A cruel piece of petty magic woven by a jealous pack healer, meant to keep you down, to keep you from ever rising. The moment our bond completed, it shattered. You are the furthest thing from barren, my love. You are life itself." She knew he was right. She could feel the truth of it singing in her blood. She, Lyra, the cast-off, the defective, was going to bear the heir to the Alpha King. She smiled, a true, radiant smile that made his breath catch. "I kept the three-legged runt everyone kicked," she said softly, her hand coming up to rest on his heart. He covered her hand with his own, his amber eyes glowing with a love that was deeper than any ocean. And he grew. He finished for her, his voice full of wonder and gratitude. "Taller than the Alpha King." "No," she corrected, rising on her toes to kiss him. "He grew into the Alpha King." And as he held her, safe and warm and loved, Lyra knew she was finally home. The cold was gone, replaced by a warmth that started in her heart and spread to the furthest corners of the kingdom. It was the warmth of a new spring, a new life, and a love that had been forged in the cruelest of winters.